You are locked in a cold stone cell beneath the greatest arena ever built. Above you, 50,000 Romans just cheered as your husband was torn apart by a lion. The crowd is leaving. The torches are dimming. And then, you hear footsteps. The door opens. A shadow looms over you. It is the survivor of today's massacre, his body still drenched in blood. He hasn't come to kill you. He has come to claim his reward. This isn't a horror movie. This is Victoria Carnales, the Carnal Victory, a real-life nightmare that Rome deliberately tried to erase from history. The sun over Rome was a blister in the sky, baking the marble of the Palatine Hill until it radiated heat like a kiln. But you left that golden brutality hours ago. Up there, the city is a cacophony of chariot wheels, market haggling, and the arrogant laughter of citizens walking toward the Colosseum. But here, in the bowels of the earth, the air is heavy and wet. It tastes of copper and unwashed bodies. You are no longer a person. You are inventory. Elara stumbled as the heavy hand of the guard shoved her forward. She was a striking woman, or she had been before the march. Her hair, once the color of autumn leaves in her Celtic homeland, was now matted with mud and dried blood. Her eyes, usually a fierce, clear blue, were wide with a terror that had surpassed screaming and settled into a cold, vibrating shock. She wore only a tattered gray tunic that barely clung to her shivering frame, the fabric stained with the filth of the road. "Move, barbarian," the guard grunted. He was a massive man, a wall of muscle wrapped in leather and sweat. His face was scarred, his nose broken so many times it lay flat against his face, and he smelled of stale wine and garlic. He didn't look at Elara with hatred. He didn't look at her with anything at all. To him, she was just a sack of grain being moved from a wagon to a warehouse. They navigated the labyrinth of the Hippodrome. The corridors were narrow, lit by sputtering oil lamps that cast long, dancing shadows against the damp brickwork. The noise from above was a dull, rhythmic thumping, thousands of feet stomping in unison, like the heartbeat of a giant monster waking up. They stopped before a wooden alcove carved into the tunnel wall. Seated there was a man who looked entirely out of place in this dungeon of horrors. He was the scribe. He was a small, bird-like man with thinning gray hair and ink-stained fingers. His toga was relatively clean, a stark contrast to the grime coating the walls. He held a stylus with delicate precision, hovering over a thick, bound ledger. "New batch?" the scribe asked, his voice dry and scratchy, like parchment rubbing together. He didn't look up. "Germanic stock. Captured near the Rhine," the guard replied, yanking Elara's chain so she fell to her knees before the desk. The scribe finally looked up. His eyes were watery and pale, devoid of any light. He looked at Elara not as a woman, but as a column of figures to be balanced. "Name?" "Elara," she whispered, her voice cracking from days of silence. "My name is—" "No!" the scribe interrupted, his tone bored. "That is not what I asked. We do not need the name your mother gave you. We need your classification." He dipped his stylus into a pot of black ink. "Age?" 19, I think," the guard offered. "Teeth are good. Hips are wide." Elara felt a wave of nausea. She wanted to spit at them, to scream that she was the daughter of a chieftain, that she was a weaver of songs, but her throat was paralyzed. 19, the scribe muttered, scratching into the wax tablet. "Origin Germanica, condition prime." He looked at Elara one last time, his gaze lingering on her trembling hands for a split second before dismissing her entirely. "She is res, a thing. Assign her number 407. Res. The word hung in the humid air. Under Roman law, she had just ceased to exist as a human being. She was furniture. She was livestock. She was property. "Take item 407 to Sector D." The scribe waved his hand, already turning the page. "The games begin in an hour. The victors will need their prizes. The guard hauled Elara to her feet. The term Item 407 echoed in her mind, erasing the sound of the wind through the trees of her home. They moved deeper into the dark, past cages where lions paced and snarled, their yellow eyes glowing in the gloom. The smell of ammonia and raw meat was overpowering here. Finally, they reached a row of stone cells. The guard unlocked a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands and shoved Elara inside. She hit the cold stone floor hard, scraping her palms. "Welcome home, 407, the guard sneered, and the door slammed shut. The lock clicked with a sound of finality that felt like a hammer to the chest. Darkness swallowed her. The cell was tiny, barely enough room to stand. A stone bench lined one wall. But it was the other details that made Elara's breath hitch. Anchored into the stone walls were heavy iron rings, some high up, some down low near the floor. They were rusted, not from rain, but from fluids. Elara crawled into the corner, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to make herself small. She reached out to steady herself against the wall, but her fingers brushed against something uneven. She froze. She squinted in the dim light filtering through the cracks in the door. The stone wall wasn't smooth, it was scarred. Desperate, jagged lines were etched into the rock. Not with a chisel, but with something softer. Something that had broken in the process. Fingernail marks, hundreds of them. Elara traced the grooves. Some were shallow scratches, others were deep gouges where the stone was stained a dark, rusty brown. She realized with a jolt of horror that these were not just marks of boredom. They were marks of agony. Someone else had been in this box. Someone else had been 407 before her. Someone had clawed at the solid stone until their fingers bled, trying to dig a way out of hell. Above her head, the muffled roar of the crowd erupted, shaking dust from the ceiling. The games had begun. But staring at those bloody scratches, Elara realized the true horror wasn't the lions or the swords above. It was that she was now just a number in a ledger, waiting to be erased. Just like the woman who had clawed these walls before her, time in the dark is measured not by the sun, but by the rhythm of the beast above. For hours, Elara huddled in the corner of her stone box, her knees pulled tight to her chest, listening to the muffled thumping of combat. But now, the rhythm had changed. The frantic, bloodlust roaring of the morning had subsided into a low, buzzing murmur, like a swarm of flies over a carcass. The air in the corridor grew heavier, settling into a suffocating stillness. It was noon, the meridiani, the time when the noble citizens of Rome took their lunch. Footsteps echoed against the wet stone, slower, more casual than the march of the soldiers. Two guards stopped just outside her cell door, their silhouettes visible through the grate. One was the brute from before. The other was younger, leaning against the wall with a boredom that chilled Elara's blood. He was chewing on something. "They say the Emperor is bored with the lions," the younger guard mumbled, spitting a pit onto the floor. "He wants theater today, something classic." "Classics are good," the older guard grunted, the sound of a wineskin uncorking punctuating his words. "Pasaife. Haven't seen a good Pasiphae in months. The last girl fainted before the bull even came out. Ruined the whole effect." Elara pressed her ear against the cold stone, her heart hammering against her ribs. Pasaife. She didn't know the name, didn't know the myth, but the way they said it, like discussing a play at a festival, made her stomach turn. A soft, desperate scratching came from the wall to her right. Not the old scratches, but new ones, a frantic signaling. "Can you hear them?" A voice whispered through the cracks in the masonry. It was a woman's voice, trembling so violently it was barely audible. "They're coming for me." Elara scrambled to the shared wall. "Who are you?" "I am Kylia," the voice sobbed. "From Thrace. They measured me yesterday. They put me in a wooden frame. They laughed about the bull. Before Elara could answer, the heavy keys jingled. The guards moved past Elara's door and stopped at the next cell. The lock disengaged with a metallic screech that sounded like a bone snapping. "Up, girl!" the older guard barked. "No, please, no!" Kalia's scream was raw, shredding the damp air. There was the sound of a scuffle, bare feet skidding on stone, the dull thud of a fist hitting flesh, and then the dragging began. Elara pressed her face to the grate. She saw them drag Kalia past. The woman was young, her dark hair wild, her eyes rolling back in her head in absolute terror. She wasn't fighting anymore. Her body had gone limp with the kind of fear that severs the soul from the flesh before death even arrives. They didn't lead her to the stairs. They led her to the great lift. Deep in the center of the hypogum, a massive wooden elevator waited, operated by a system of pulleys and counterweights managed by sweating slaves. The guards threw Kalia onto the platform. They tossed a garment over her, a white robe, meant to look regal, meant to mock a queen. "Enjoy the view, Majesty," the younger guard laughed. The capstan turned. The ropes groaned under the tension. Elara watched as the lift began to rise, carrying Kalia up toward the square of blinding light far above. Then, Elara was alone again, but she wasn't spared. She was the audience in the pit. From above, the narrator's voice boomed, distorted by the architecture but clear enough to be understood. He spoke of ancient sins, of gods and punishments, and then the crowd laughed. It wasn't a roar of anger, it was the light, tittering laughter of people being entertained. Elara imagined them up there. She pictured the senators in their white togas, their fingers sticky with honeyed dates, passing wine cups to their wives. She imagined them leaning forward, pointing at the terrified girl in the white robe as if she were a puppet. Then came the other sound, the heavy, rhythmic snorting of a beast, the scratching of hooves on sand, the bull. Elara covered her ears, squeezing her eyes shut, but the stone walls of the cell acted like a drum, amplifying the vibrations. She heard the crowd gasp, a sound of collective delight. She heard the narrator shout a line of poetry, and then she heard Kalia. It was a sound that defied language. It wasn't just a scream of pain, it was the sound of a human being unmade. It went on for an eternity, rising and falling, pleading with gods who were not listening until it was drowned out by the thunderous applause of 50,000 people. "Bravo!" someone shouted from the stands, the voice carrying down the ventilation shafts. "A performance worthy of the gods!" Elara bit into her own hand to stop herself from vomiting. The taste of her own blood filled her mouth, mixing with the phantom scent of the horror above. The cheering slowly died down. The heavy thud of the lift returning echoed through the tunnels, but this time it came down empty. There was no Kalia, no white robe, just the wooden platform, stained dark. The guards returned a moment later, whistling a cheerful tune. The younger one was finishing his snack. "Told you," the older one said. "Good show, very spirited." "Messy though," the younger one replied, wiping his mouth. "The cleanup crew is going to complain." Silence returned to the hypogum, but it was different now. It was heavier. And then a new sound began. Drip, drip, splash, water. Above, on the arena sands, slaves were dumping buckets of water to wash away the blood and the filth, preparing the stage for the afternoon's main event. The water trickled down through the cracks in the wooden floor of the arena, filtering through the beams and dripping into the darkness below. It fell like rain in the corridor outside Elara's cell. Pink water. She stared at the puddle forming near the drain, realizing with a cold, paralyzing clarity that Kalia was gone. The woman who had whispered to her minutes ago had been erased, washed away like dirt, so the games could continue. And tomorrow, or the day after, the lift would come back down, and the crowd would be hungry again. The silence that followed the games was worse than the noise. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon, the hypogeum transformed. The lions were caged, their bellies full. The dead were carted away to the spoliarium to be stripped of armor and dignity. The roaring crowd had dispersed into the Roman night, leaving behind a vacuum in the tunnels that was quickly filled by a different kind of tension. Elara sat in the darkness of cell 407, her body rigid. She knew what came next. The older women in the holding cages had whispered about it during the march to Rome. They called it the Victoria Carnales, the Carnal Victory. It was the shadow law of the arena. What the sword wins, the flesh claims. Outside, the heavy iron door of the corridor swung open. Clang, step, clang, step. The footsteps were different this time. They were not the flat-footed slap of sandals worn by guards. These were heavy boots reinforced with greaves. The sound of metal scraping against stone echoed rhythmically, growing louder, closer. It was the sound of a war machine deactivating. "This one," a guard's voice sneered, "fresh from Germania, unspoiled." "Lucky bastard," another guard chuckled. "I heard Senator Flavia's wife offered 10,000 sesterti just to wash his back tonight. But he chooses the dungeon rat instead." The keys rattled. Elara pressed her back against the cold, damp stone, wishing she could merge with it. She fixed her eyes on the door, her breath trapped in her throat. The lock tumbled. The door creaked open. A giant filled the frame. He was a mountain of battered bronze and leather. He wore the heavy manica armor on his arm, and his chest was bare, slick with a mixture of sweat, oil, and blood that was not his own. He wore a helmet that covered his entire face, a smooth, faceless visor with only 2 dark slits for eyes. This was Crixus. He was a murmillo, a class of gladiator built like a fortress. Even standing still, he radiated a terrifying violence. He smelled of death, fresh, copper-tanged death. The guard slapped Crixus on the shoulder, leaving a smudge on the bronze. 2 hours, champion. Don't break her too fast. The magistrate wants to sell her to the mines if she survives the season." The guard laughed, a wet, ugly sound, and slammed the door shut, locking them in. Elara ceased to breathe. The cell was tiny, and Crixus took up nearly all the air. He stood there, a silent statue of war, the oil lamp from the corridor casting his shadow long and distorted across the floor. He was the embodiment of everything that had destroyed her world. She waited for him to lunge. She waited for the brutality that was his right, the violence that was his language. Her hands curled into claws, ready to scratch, to fight, even if it meant dying faster. Slowly, the giant raised his hands. Elara flinched, squeezing her eyes shut. Click. The sound was small, mechanical. She opened her eyes. He wasn't reaching for her. He was reaching for his chin. With a heavy grunt, he pulled the helmet off. The monster vanished. Beneath the bronze was just a man. He had thick, dark hair matted with sweat, and a face that looked like a map of old wars. A jagged scar ran from his ear to his jaw, and his nose had been broken and set crookedly. But it was his eyes that caught her. They weren't the eyes of a beast. They were dark, deep, and incredibly weary. Crixus didn't look at her with lust. He didn't look at her with the predator's gaze she had seen in the guards. He looked at her with a profound, exhausting indifference. He groaned, a sound of deep, physical pain, and slid down the wall opposite her. The armor clattered against the stone as he slumped to the floor, extending his legs. He closed his eyes, tilting his head back against the damp rock. "Stop shaking," he rumbled. His voice was deep, rough like gravel grinding together, the Latin accented with something older, Gaulish perhaps. "You're making the air vibrate." Elara didn't stop shaking. She couldn't. Are you going to kill me?" she whispered. her Latin broken and clumsy. Crixus opened one eye. He looked at her trembling form, huddled in the rags of her tunic. He looked at the iron rings on the wall, then down at his own hands, which were still stained red. "I have killed 3 men today," he said softly. The crowd screamed my name. Women threw flowers, men threw gold. He let out a bitter, dry laugh. "I am the god of the arena, apparently." He reached into a pouch tied to his belt. Elara flinched again. He pulled out a hard, round loaf of bread. It was the dense, high-quality grain given to victors, better than anything she had seen in weeks. He broke it in half. "But a god is just a slave with a sword," he muttered. He tossed half the loaf across the small cell. It landed near Elara's knee. "Eat," he commanded, closing his eyes again. "I'm not going to touch you, girl. I'm too tired to be the monster they pay me to be." Elara stared at the bread. Then she stared at him. He was effectively a prisoner too, she realized. Despite the adoring crowds and the noble women who wanted to buy his bathwater, he was locked in this stone box just like her. The silence that stretched between them wasn't peaceful, but the terror had dulled into a strange, heavy confusion. Slowly, keeping her eyes fixed on the man who could snap her neck with one hand, Elara reached out and took the bread. The routine of hell is perhaps worse than its chaos. Chaos you can fight. Routine you must endure. It had been 3 weeks since Elara first arrived in the hypogeum. The days had blurred into a gray loop of darkness, punctuated only by the distant rhythmic roaring of the crowds above and the turning of the lock. She had learned the schedule of the underworld. Morning was for the screams of the condemned. Noon was for the silence of the executioners. Evening was for the victors. The lock tumbled. Clank, clank. Elara didn't flinch this time. She sat on the edge of the stone bench, her hands folded in her lap, watching the heavy door swing outward. Crixus entered. He looked worse than usual. He was limping, favoring his left leg. His bronze greave was dented inward, as if struck by a massive hammer, and a dark, wet stain was spreading across the linen wrapping beneath his armor. But he was not alone. Following him was a man Elara had not seen before, a frantic, weasel-faced slave carrying a small ceramic jar and a curved metal tool. This was Milo, an unctor, one of the arena attendants responsible for the fighters' bodies. "Sit, sit, champion," Milo chirped, his voice grating like sand on glass. "We must harvest before it dries. The Lady Antonia is paying double for this batch. She swears it cures her migraines." Crixus growled, a low rumble deep in his chest, but he slumped onto the wooden stool that had been brought into the cell. Milo immediately set to work. He took the curved metal tool, a strigil, and began to scrape Crixus's skin. He collected the mixture of sweat, oil, dirt, and blood that coated the gladiator's massive shoulders, carefully funneling the gray sludge into the ceramic jar. Elara watched in morbid fascination. She had heard whispers of this, that the fluids of these killers were sold as aphrodisiacs and beauty treatments to the wealthy women of Rome. It was the ultimate commodification. Even the waste of Crixus's body was more valuable than Elara's life. "Careful on the ribs," Crixus hissed, wincing. Yes, almost done," Milo muttered, scraping the jar's rim. "Pure gold this is. You sweat money, Crixus." "Get out!" Crixus barked, kicking the stool. Milo scrambled back, clutching his precious jar of filth. "Rest well, champion. The physician will come for the leg." Eventually. The door slammed shut. The lock engaged. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. Crixus let out a long breath and began to fumble with the straps of his damaged greave. His fingers, thick and usually dexterous with a sword, were shaking. He couldn't undo the buckle. Without thinking, Elara stood up. She crossed the small stone floor. Crixus froze, his hand hovering near the dagger at his belt. a reflex born of the arena. But he didn't draw it. He watched her. Elara knelt before him. Her hands, once soft but now calloused from gripping the stone walls, worked the leather straps. She pulled the dented bronze armor away from his shin. The wound was ugly, a deep, jagged gash where a shield edge had bitten into the muscle. It was bleeding sluggishly. "There is water in the pitcher," Crixus said, his voice rough. It was not a command, but a suggestion. Elara fetched the bowl of stale water and a rag. She began to clean the wound. The contact was strange, intimate yet entirely devoid of affection. It was the pragmatism of two injured animals licking each other's wounds because no one else would. "Why?" Elara asked softly, dipping the rag into the pink-tinged water. Crixus looked down at the top of her head. "Why what? Why do you come back here?" She looked up, meeting his tired eyes. "There are other cells, other women who haven't been broken yet. Why do you choose number 407 every night?" Crixus leaned his head back against the wall, staring at the ceiling where the dust of the arena floor sifted down through the cracks. "Because the others?" He paused, searching for the words. "The other gladiators, they fight because they like the blood, or because they want the glory. When they win, they want to dominate something, to feel like a master for an hour." He looked back at her. "I don't want to be a master. I just want quiet." Elara finished binding the leg with a strip of cloth torn from his tunic. She sat back on her heels. The air between them felt fragile. "My father is a chieftain," Elara said, a sudden spark of hope igniting in her chest. "He has gold, furs, amber. If you could get a message to the north, he would pay for me. He would pay for you too." Crixus's expression didn't change, but his eyes grew colder, sadder. He shook his head slowly. "You don't understand where you are, little bird," he said. "To Rome, you are not a prisoner of war anymore. You are damnati, condemned." "But ransom?" "There is no ransom for a chair." Crixus interrupted, his voice harsh. "There is no ransom for a dog. That is what you are in their law. Res property. If I tried to buy you, they would laugh. If I tried to free you, they would crucify us both along the Appian Way." The hope in Elara's chest flickered and died, leaving a cold ash. "Then what happens?" she whispered. "What happens when you stop winning?" The question hung in the air, heavy as a stone. Crixus looked away. He looked at the iron rings on the wall, the ones meant to chain women like her for men like him. "I am 30 years old," Crixus said quietly. "That is ancient for a gladiator. My knees ache, my eyes are slower than they were last year. Today the Thracian almost had me. One day soon, I will be a second too slow." He leaned forward, forcing her to look at him. "When I die on the sand," he said, his voice devoid of pity, "there will be no one to claim this cell. The magistrate will look at the ledger. He will see item 407. He will see that you are no longer fresh. You are used goods." Elara stopped breathing. "They won't sell you," Crixus continued, the truth brutally simple. "They will send you to the bestiarii, the beast masters. They need meat to train the tigers for the morning shows." Elara stared at him. She wanted to scream. She wanted to strike him, but she did neither. The tears didn't come from fear. Fear was sharp. Fear was active. This was despair. It was a hollow, crushing weight that collapsed her lungs. A single tear tracked through the dirt on her cheek. She wasn't living. She was just waiting to be recycled. Crixus reached out, his rough thumb brushing the tear away. It was the first time he had touched her skin with anything other than the bread. "So do not hope for ransom," he whispered. "Hope that I live another day." The stone was harder than bone, but Elara's will was harder than both. In the dead of night, when the only sounds were the distant, restless pacing of the tigers and the snoring of the guards down the hall, Elara worked. She held a sharp fragment of flint, chipped from the floor during a moment of desperation, and pressed it against the wall of cell 407. Scritch. Scritch. Her fingers were raw, the nails broken and bleeding, but she didn't stop. She wasn't trying to dig a tunnel. She was digging a grave marker. She traced the letters slowly, mimicking the crude Latin graffiti she had found on her first day. Above her own work was the faint, desperate carving of her predecessor, Amelia of the Brigantes. I saw my children die. Below it, Elara carved a new name, Kaelia. They will not vanish, Elara whispered into the dark, blowing stone dust from the fresh grooves. You are not a number, you are not meat. She added another name, and another. Women she had seen dragged to the lifts and never returned. Women who had died of fever in the damp dark. With every stroke, she felt she was stealing something back from Rome. They could take the bodies, they could take the futures, but Elara would ensure the stones remembered the names. A shadow fell across the grate. Elara froze, hiding the flint in her palm. But it was Crixus. He signaled for silence, his eyes darting toward the guard station. He didn't enter the cell tonight. Instead, he knelt close to the bars, his massive frame blocking the light. Listen to me, he murmured, his voice barely a vibration in the air. I have found the path. He pushed a small, rolled scrap of papyrus through the bars. Elara unrolled it with trembling hands. It was a crude drawing, sketched in charcoal. The cloaca, Crixus explained, pointing a thick finger at a series of wavy lines. The great sewer. The arena drains into it. It flows south, emptying into the Tiber. The drains are grated, Elara whispered, looking at the drawing. Iron bars. Thick as my arm. I know, Crixus nodded. But the Romans are superstitious. They fear the underground. They fear that the spirits of the dead will crawl back up the pipes. He leaned closer, his scar pale in the lamplight. Because of the Spartacus rebellion, they welded the main gates shut, but they ignored the maintenance shafts near the beast cages. They think the smell keeps people away. And does it? It smells of death, Crixus said grimly. Perfect for us. Before they could speak further, the heavy iron door at the far end of the corridor slammed open. Torches flared. The sound of hobnailed boots, many of them, thundered against the stone. This wasn't a patrol. It was a raid. Crixus stood up instantly, backing away from her cell door to look casual, but his hand hovered near his dagger. A group of soldiers marched in, led by a man Elara had never seen. He was tall, thin, and wore the pristine white toga of a high administrator, creating a jarring contrast with the filth of the dungeon. This was Decimus, the curator munerum, the official in charge of arena logistics. He held a ledger. Clearance, Decimus announced, his voice bored. The campaign in Britannia has been successful. General Agricola has sent us 500 new specimens. Fresh stock arrives tomorrow. He gestured with a manicured hand. We need space. Purge the damaged goods. The soldiers moved with terrifying efficiency. They didn't unlock every cell, only specific ones. They dragged out a woman who had lost her mind to syphilis. They grabbed a girl whose leg had gangrened. Then the guard stopped at cell 407. This one? The guard asked. Germanic. Been here 3 weeks. She's staring at the walls, losing her edge. Decimus glanced at his ledger, then at Elara. She stood paralyzed, the flint cutting into her palm. Process her, Decimus said, waving his hand dismissively. We need the cell for a Briton queen. The guard jammed the key into the lock. The tumblers clicked. Elara backed against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. Not the arena, Not a glorious death, just processing, to make room for newer inventory. No! The roar didn't come from Elara. It came from the corridor. Crixus stepped between the guard and the door. He didn't draw his weapon. That would mean instant execution. But he used his sheer mass to block the way. "She stays," Crixus growled. The guards drew their gladiuses. Decimus turned slowly, raising an eyebrow. "The Murmillo speaks? Careful, Gladiator. You are a favorite, but you are not indispensable." "She is my prize," Crixus said, his voice steady, though Elara could see the sweat beading on his neck. "By the laws of the arena, the victor has rights to his spoils." "The law says you have use of the spoils," Decimus corrected coldly. "It does not say you own the storage space. She is taking up a cell I need. Move aside or join her in the pit." The soldiers stepped forward. Elara squeezed her eyes shut, preparing for the hands that would drag her to her death. "Wait." Crixus reached into his tunic. He pulled out a heavy leather pouch. It clinked with the distinctive sound of gold. He tossed it. The pouch hit Decimus's chest with a heavy thud. The administrator caught it, surprised by the weight. He opened the drawstring. The gold coins inside glinted in the torchlight. "My winnings," Crixus said, his voice hollow. "From the Emperor's games. 3 years of blood." Decimus weighed the pouch in his hand. It was a fortune. It was enough to buy a small farm in Tuscany. It was enough to buy a gladiator's freedom, the Rudies. "This was for your retirement, wasn't it, Crixus?" Decimus smiled, a cruel, thin expression. "You were going to buy your way out next month." "She stays," Crixus repeated, "and she keeps this cell." Decimus looked at the gold, then at the terrified woman in the cell, and finally at the gladiator who had just traded his future for a piece of damaged inventory. "The Romans appreciate a good tragedy," Decimus chuckled. He pocketed the gold. "Very well. Item 407 remains designated as reserved." He signaled the guards. "Move on. There are plenty of other throats to cut." The procession moved down the hall. Screams erupted from the lower levels as the purge continued. Crixus stood before the closed door of cell 407. He didn't look at Elara. He looked at his empty hands. "You," Elara whispered, gripping the bars. "You bought me. You could have been free." Crixus turned his head slowly. The fire in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by a bleak resolve. "I can never be free while this place stands," he said quietly. Then he looked at the wall behind her, where she had carved the names. "Finish the names, Elara. Carve them deep, because now we have no choice but to escape. I have nothing left to lose." Rome did not scream today. It vibrated. The Emperor had decreed a festival of 100 days. It was a celebration of a frontier victory that Elara had never heard of, but the pretext didn't matter. The blood was the point. For the last week, the Hypogeum had transformed from a dungeon into a factory running at maximum capacity. The air was thick with a choking yellow dust that filtered down through the trapdoors, sand mixed with perfumes to mask the stench of death. The corridors were a chaotic highway of logistical nightmares. Slaves sprinted past with buckets of water and baskets of sand. Physicians ran with tourniquets already prepared. Elara stood at the grate of cell 407, watching the machinery of the Empire churn. Directly opposite her cell, a massive timber elevator, a pegma, was being loaded. It wasn't carrying a prisoner this time. It was carrying a bear. The beast was in a frenzy, thrashing against its cage, its roar deafening in the enclosed stone tunnel. 8 sweating slaves pushed the capstan, the thick hemp ropes groaning under the tension. With a shuddering creak, the lift began to rise, hoisting the monster toward the sunlight to devour whatever poor soul waited above. This was the industrialization of sexual violence and murder that Crixus had spoken of. It wasn't a battle. It was a meat grinder. The door to her cell opened, but there was no guard this time. The corridor was too chaotic. The usual security protocols had broken down under the sheer volume of the slaughter. Crixus slipped inside. He looked magnificent and terrible. His armor was polished to a mirror sheen, the bronze greaves gleaming under the oil lamps. He wore a new helmet, its visor decorated with silver filigree. But beneath the finery, Elara saw the man. His hands were wrapped tight with leather straps, but they were trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a man walking to his own funeral. He didn't sit down today. He didn't offer bread. He stood by the door, blocking the view from the hallway. "The schedule is advanced," Crixus said, his voice flat. "The Emperor is impatient." "You fight today?" Elara asked, though she already knew. "I fight the main event," Crixus nodded. "Against Valerius. He is a retiarius." Elara's breath hitched. She knew what that meant. A net fighter, fast, agile, armed with a trident. They were the natural predators of the heavy, armored Murmillo. Crixus, with his bad knee and aging joints, was slow. Against a young dancing opponent like Valerius, he would be picked apart like a crab by a gull. "He is 20 years old," Crixus said, staring at the wall where Elara had carved the names. "He wants glory. He wants to be the one who kills the great Crixus." He reached into his belt, behind the heavy leather apron. "Take this." He pressed a cold, heavy object into Elara's palm. She looked down. It was a key. It was old, crusted with rust and large, not a key for a cell door, but for something heavier. "The shift commander was drunk last night celebrating the start of the games," Crixus murmured, his eyes darting to the corridor. "I lifted it from his belt. It opens the maintenance gate in Sector F, the one near the tiger cages. It leads to the sewer main." Elara gripped the key so hard the rust bit into her skin. "You kept it? You could have used this. You could have gone." With a bad leg? Crixus gave a short, humorless smile. "I wouldn't make it past the first junction. And besides, the crowd needs a death today. If I disappear, they will search the tunnels. They will lock down the city. If I go out there and die, they will be satisfied. They will be drunk on blood and wine. The guards will be lazy tonight." The realization hit Elara like a physical blow. He wasn't just fighting, he was creating a diversion. He was offering himself as the sacrifice to buy her a window of chaos. "Crixus," she choked out, reaching for his arm. The bronze was cold, but his skin was burning hot. From the tunnel, a trumpet blasted, a deep, mournful sound that signaled the entrance of the champions. "They are calling me," Crixus said. He pulled his arm away gently. He put his helmet on, the silver visor snapping down, hiding his tired eyes, hiding the man, leaving only the machine. He turned to the door. "Crixus!" Elara cried out, abandoning caution. "Look at me!" The giant paused at the threshold. The roar of 50,000 people vibrated through the ceiling, chanting his name. Crixus, Crixus, Crixus. They loved him. And they were going to cheer as his blood turned the sand black. He didn't turn around. He didn't look at her. To look at her would be to break, and he needed to be iron. "Do not carve your name on that wall, Elara," his voice echoed from inside the helmet, metallic and final. "The wall is for the dead. Carry that name out of here, make it live." Then he stepped into the corridor, joining the stream of the damned marching toward the light. The heavy door swung shut, leaving Elara alone in the dark, clutching the rusty key to a future he would never see. The world did not end with a whisper. It ended with a roar. 50,000 voices screamed in unison above, a sound so physical it shook dust from the mortar of the ceiling. The Summa Rudis, the referee, had signaled the start of the main event. Somewhere up in the blinding sun, Crixus was stepping onto the burning sand to die. Elara gripped the rusted key until her knuckles turned white. This was the moment. Down the hall, chaos erupted. It started with the snapping of metal, a sound Crixus had promised. Then came the scream of a handler, cut short by a wet, guttural snarl. The sabotage had worked. The chain on the containment cage for the tigress beast, weakened by acid or file, had snapped. "Loose! The beast is loose in Sector B!" A guard shrieked. Boots thundered past Elara's cell. Men were running, not toward her, but away, toward the source of the panic. The strict discipline of the Roman military machine collapsed into frantic self-preservation when faced with 400 pounds of striped muscle in a narrow corridor. Elara waited 3 heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. She shoved the heavy iron key into the lock. It resisted, gritty with years of neglect. She twisted it with both hands, using every ounce of strength she possessed. The rust ground against the tumblers, screaming in protest. "Please, please!" With a dull thunk, the bolt retracted. Elara pushed the door open. The corridor was empty, save for a dropped spear and a flickering torch on the floor. The air smelled of panic, sweat and urine, mixed with the musk of the tiger prowling somewhere in the gloom. She didn't run toward the light. She ran toward the dark. She counted the alcoves as Crixus had instructed, past the armory, past the winch room, to the heavy, nondescript door marked with the symbol of Neptune, the god of water. This was the maintenance access for the Cloaca Maxima connection. The veins of the city. The key turned easily here. The humidity kept the mechanism lubricated. Elara slipped inside and heaved the door shut, locking it behind her. The roar of the tiger and the shouting guards were instantly muffled, replaced by a new sound, rushing water, and something else, sloshing. She descended a spiral of slick, slimy stairs. The air grew cold and foul, thick with the stench of rot and sulfur. At the bottom, she found herself standing on a narrow ledge overlooking a subterranean river. This was the engineering marvel of Rome. The empire prided itself on aqueducts that brought pure water in, but the true genius was how they took the filth out. The tunnel was a massive barrel vault, bricked with obsessive precision, an archway high enough for a man to walk upright. But the water flowing through it was not brown. It was red. Elara gagged, covering her mouth with her arm. This was the drainage from the arena floor. The sand above was designed to be porous, to soak up the mess so the games wouldn't be slippery. And here, below, was where it all washed down. The blood of animals, the blood of criminals, the blood of gladiators, all churning together in a frothy crimson soup. She had to get in. There was no walkway. The ledge ended. To reach the main junction that led to the Tiber River, she had to wade through the waste of the games. Elara lowered herself into the channel. The liquid was warm, horrifically warm. It rose to her waist, thick and viscous. Debris bumped against her legs. She tried not to look, but the faint light from the ventilation shafts above revealed them. Broken spears, pieces of armor, and things that used to be alive. "Just keep moving," she whispered to herself, her voice shaking. "Carry the name out." She waded against the current of filth, fighting the urge to scream. The architecture was indifferent to the horror it channeled. The bricks were perfectly laid, the curve of the tunnel mathematically flawless. It was a perfect machine designed to flush human life away like excrement. Suddenly the tunnel vibrated. It wasn't the water. It was the sound from above. The ventilation shaft she was passing under led directly to the center of the arena. Clang. The sound of bronze meeting steel rang out, magnified by the acoustics of the drain. Then a gasp from the crowd, a sudden intake of breath from 50,000 throats. Elara froze. She looked up at the dark grate above her head. Dust motes danced in a shaft of sunlight that pierced the gloom. Thud. A heavy impact. The sound of a large body hitting the sand. Silence. A silence so absolute, it drowned out the rushing of the red water. It lasted for a second, maybe two. The moment of judgment. And then the chant began. It started as a murmur, then swelled into a thunderous wave that crashed down through the grate, vibrating in Elara's very bones. Valerius! 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 The name was not Crixus. Elara's legs gave out. She collapsed into the filth, the red water rushing up to her chest. A sob ripped its way out of her throat, raw and agonizing. He was gone. The mountain of a man who had shared his bread, who had bought her life with his own, was lying dead on the sand above. The crowd was cheering for his killer. The boy with the net had won. She wanted to stay there. She wanted to let the Red River take her, to wash her away into the dark, just like Kylia, just like the rest of the inventory. But then she felt it. The cold metal of the key pressed against her chest, tucked inside her tunic. "Hope that I live another day," he had said. But he hadn't lived. He had died so she could have her day. Elara bit her lip until she tasted her own blood, sharp and metallic. It grounded her. She stood up, her soaking tunic heavy with the weight of the arena's sins. She wiped the tears from her face, leaving streaks of grime. "Goodbye, Crixus," she whispered to the grate above. She turned her back on the shaft of light. Ahead, the tunnel widened. The air smelled faintly fresher, the smell of river mud and open sky. The Tiber. She began to crawl forward again, pushing aside a tangled mass of what looked like a lion's mane blocking the flow. She moved with a new, cold determination. She was no longer just a victim escaping a dungeon. She was a witness carrying a testimony written in stone and blood, and she would not let the river drown it. The wind in the northern valleys of Dacia was different from the wind in Rome. It did not carry the scent of spices and rot. It smelled of pine, wet earth, and freedom. Elara sat on a wooden stool outside her small cottage, the evening mist curling around her ankles. Her hands, once blistered from clawing at stone walls, were now mapped with the deep wrinkles of age and stained with the green juices of healing herbs. She was the village midwife, the woman who brought life into the world, a defiance of the empire that had tried so hard to deal only in death. Around her sat a circle of children, their eyes wide in the twilight. They tugged at her woolen shawl, eager for a tale. "Tell us about the heroes, grandmother," a little boy named Gaius chirped. "Tell us about the warriors in golden armor." Elara smiled, but it was a sad, weary curvature of the lips. "I will not tell you about heroes, little one," she said, her voice raspy like dry leaves. "I will tell you the truth. The world is full of stories about men who kill. It has forgotten the stories of those who survived." She looked past the children, toward the southern horizon where the great roads led back to the heart of the dying beast. Rome was not what it once was. The legions were retreating. The borders were shrinking. The invincible empire was rotting from the inside out, its soul eaten away by the very cruelty it had industrialized. Once, there was a stone box deep underground, Elara began, her fingers tracing the phantom shape of a rusty key she no longer carried. And in that box, there were no golden warriors. There were only people. People who held onto each other in the dark when the world above wanted to turn them into dust. She told them of the cold. She told them of the fear that tasted like copper. She did not spare them the horror, for to sanitize the past was to lie about it. But she also told them of the bread shared by a monster who unmasked himself to be a man. She told them of the names carved into rock so deep that not even the river could wash them away. "They tried to make us into res," she whispered, using the old hated word. "Things, but things do not bleed. Things do not cry. And things do not remember." The children fell silent, sensing the weight of the history in her voice. They didn't understand it all, not yet. But they understood that their grandmother was made of something stronger than the iron of a sword. Weeks later, Elara made the journey. It was a pilgrimage she had promised herself for 50 years. The road to Rome was dangerous, filled with bandits and deserters, but old women with nothing but a walking stick are rarely bothered. When she finally stood before the Flavian amphitheater, the Colosseum, it was silent. The Emperor Honorius had banned the Gladiator games years ago. The great gates, once thronged with screaming mobs, were now hanging off their hinges. Grass sprouted from the cracks in the travertine marble. The statues of gods in the arches were missing their heads or their hands, victims of time and vandals. The beast was dead. Its skeleton remained, bleaching in the sun. Elara walked through the vomitorium, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. There were no vendors selling honeyed dates, no scent of blood, just the smell of dust and old rain. She made her way down. The barriers to the hypogum had rotted away. She descended into the belly of the arena, the place that had haunted her nightmares for half a century. It was flooded in parts, reclaiming its nature as a swamp. But Sector D was dry. She found it. The door was gone, repurposed for firewood long ago. But the cell remained. The stone bench was there, and the iron rings, rusted, orange, useless, still protruded from the wall. Elara stepped inside. The space felt smaller now, or perhaps her spirit had just grown larger. She reached out and touched the wall. Her fingers found them immediately, the scratches. They were faint now, worn down by decades of dampness, but they were there. Amelia, Kalia, Elara. She hadn't carved her own name then. She had carried it out. But standing here now, she traced the invisible letters of her survival over the stone. She reached into her cloak and pulled out a single wild flower she had picked from the overgrown sands of the arena floor above. It was a simple thing, a weed really, with small purple petals, resilient, stubborn. She placed the flower on the stone bench, right beneath the iron ring where Crixus had once sat and shared his bread. "I am here," she whispered, her voice cracking in the silence of the tomb. Crixus, Amelia, Kalia. She named them one by one, filling the empty cell with their spirits. And all the sisters whose names I never knew. Tears streamed down her face, hot and cleansing. They were not tears of despair this time. They were tears of victory. "They thought they could erase you," she said to the ghosts. "They thought they could turn you into inventory. But I am still here. I am old. I have lived a life. I have brought babies into the world with hands that you saved." She leaned her forehead against the cold stone, closing her eyes. "I still remember," she breathed. "History may forget. The books will talk about emperors and battles, but I will keep you. As long as I breathe, you are not things. You are people." She stood there for a long time, a small gray-haired woman standing in the ruins of the greatest empire on earth, holding a vigil for the forgotten. Then, Elara turned. She walked out of the cell, out of the hypogum, and back up toward the light. She did not look back. She didn't need to. She carried them with her. The camera of history pulls back, rising higher and higher. It shows the tiny figure of the woman walking away from the massive, crumbling stone oval. The Colosseum stands vast and hollow, a broken tooth in the jaw of the world. It is empty of noise, empty of blood. But in the center of the ruin, deep in the dark, a single purple flower lies on a stone bench, bright and alive against the gray, a testament that love and memory are stronger than stone. The Colosseum today is just a skeleton of stone, visited by tourists who take pictures where people once bled. But the true legacy of history isn't found in the monuments of the powerful. It is found in the quiet resilience of those who survived them. In our daily lives, we are often tempted to treat people like numbers, like traffic, customers, or users. We get so used to the noise of the world that we forget to listen to the individual cries for help. Elara's story teaches us that even when a system tries to strip away our humanity, we have the power to hold on to it. It reminds us that a single act of kindness, like sharing a piece of bread, can be an act of rebellion. You don't need to be an emperor to change the world. You just need to refuse to let the world turn you, or your neighbor, into a thing. If this story touched your heart, and if you believe that the voices of the forgotten deserve to be heard, please help us keep their memory alive. Click the like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. It helps us uncover more hidden truths from the past. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter of our history. Before you go, I want to say a short prayer for you. May God grant you the strength to endure your own dark valleys, just as Elara did. May He give you the eyes to see the value in every soul you meet, and the courage to bring light into the shadows. May you always be a survivor, and never just a number. If you receive this blessing and agree with the message of this story, please write Amen in the comments below. Stay human, and I will see you in the next story.